I use hard drive enclosures like these a lot. And one question I've always had with these is, does it actually make a difference which one I purchase? In theory, they should all be the same. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So if we look at the limits for a 2.5-inch SSD SATA 3 hard drive, the upper limit is about 600 megabytes per second. So if you use a hard drive enclosure like this that has USB-A, as long as you're plugging it into USB 3.0, the fastest speed for this is 5 gigabits per second, or about 625 megabytes per second. That means that this enclosure actually has faster speeds than the hard drive itself. And if you get an enclosure like this with USB-C, now USB-C has faster transfer speeds. It can go up to 10 gigabits per second, or just over a gigabyte per second. But again, that's a faster speed than the SSD itself can actually handle. So in theory, if I get an enclosure like this that's really nifty and see-through, or if I get one like this that doesn't have any case, you just plug it directly in, or if I get one like this that looks very similar to one like this, they should all more or less be the same. But I wasted my day yesterday to see if they are all the same in practice, and in fact, they are not. What I ended up testing yesterday was I did speed tests for every single hard drive enclosure I had. I tested on multiple computers with multiple different hard drives just to try to account for outliers. For each test I ran 3 separate tests like this so I could get the average. I did the read speed, I did the write speed, I took together the averages. I separated each test by cable type, whether it was USB-A or USB-C. I even did a test where I plugged the hard drives directly into a computer itself to see if that made a difference. I averaged everything together on a spreadsheet. I looked at what the highest or best results were for each test, and I came up with the following information. So here on the spreadsheet is where I wrote down the key points I discovered. Let me just go over these one by one, and then I will share with you my suggestions for a hard drive enclosure. The main test I wanted to confirm is if the cable actually matters, and what I was able to confirm was not really, but also kind of. But specifically what I wanted to test is if a USB-A cable like this is any slower than USB-C cable like this. Now I've always known that USB-C is faster than USB-A, but I've also known that there are limits on hard drive speeds. And after going through all the tests, what I actually found out was the fastest average speed I got was actually with the USB-A connector. Now that doesn't mean that the USB-A connector is the way to go or it's any faster. If you look at these results, they are all more or less the same. And in fact, when I tested a hard drive enclosure like this, and I did it once with USB-C and once with USB-A, the USB-C transfer speeds were slightly faster. Now, again, in theory, it doesn't matter. Both USB-A and USB-C are faster than what the hard drive can handle. But I think the thing to take away from this is if you're using a hard drive enclosure and you have the option between USB-A and USB-C, just use whatever is more convenient. It's going to be the same. One thing I want to mention with a test I did was I actually installed an SSD directly into a mini PC and tested the speeds directly via SATA. And again, with the limits of this SSD, it really shouldn't matter. But the surprising thing to me was I was actually getting slower speeds with the SSD plugged directly into the computer. Now, I assume that has something to do with the computer I use. I just thought that was interesting. Nothing really to take away from that, other than if you think you want to install a hard drive in your PC to get faster speeds than just using a USB enclosure like one of these, again, doesn't matter. If you want external storage, just use one of these. You're not going to get faster speeds installing it directly into your computer. As far as what made the biggest difference in all of my tests, the 2 biggest factors were which computer did I use and which hard drive did I use. If you look at this row with the GMK Tech computer versus the Melee computer, with this computer, I was getting speeds at about 405. With the GMK Tech, I was getting speeds of 385. Now, the GMK Tech is actually a more powerful and faster PC, but that's the PC I'm using actively for my desktop setup. I have a lot of things plugged into USB, so I suspect that is probably the reason. Don't know for sure. I just thought it was interesting that I was getting differences based on the computer I was using. And then if you compare this Western Digital blue hard drive with this ID Sonics, I was getting faster speeds on the ID Sonics than I was on the Western Digital Blue. Based on all the tests I did, here are the suggestions I have for you. If you are going to buy a hard drive enclosure like one of these, the hard drive enclosure I got with the faster speeds was this BENFEI enclosure. So if you look here, I bought two BENFEI. One was the 6 gigabit per second. The other was a 5 gigabit per second. We scroll over here to the results. The 6 gigabit per second actually performed significantly better than every other hard drive enclosure. Everything else was roughly the same. So the first suggestion I would have for you, if you are looking to buy a hard drive enclosure like this, is get one that says 6 gigabit per second. You will actually get faster speeds with the 6 gigabit per second enclosure. So as far as suggestions go, with all of the enclosures I tested, this BENFEI is the one I would absolutely recommend. It's the same price as all the other ones I tested, so there's no reason not to get this. The other reason I would suggest getting this enclosure is it does have a USB-C connector on the end. And I do appreciate that it has USB-C with the adapter for USB-A. So that makes it a little bit more versatile. And one nice touch I really like with this cable is it actually lists the speeds on the cable itself. So if you want to use the cable for something else, it will work great for something else. My next suggestion for an enclosure would be this ELUTENG. I like this again because it is USB-C. It does have the adapter, but the unique thing about this is that it has the clear case. So when you put a hard drive in here, you can see it without having to open it up. That may not seem that great, but when you deal with a lot of hard drives like I do, it's actually really useful. My third suggestion would be this from SABRENT. This connector might actually be the one I use the most, especially when I'm dealing with hard drives for backup. The nice thing about this is you can just put it in your hard drive, take it out, put it in another one. So if you're using a bunch of hard drives for archive or something like this, this is just really simple. And my last recommendation would be this BENFEI enclosure. And the reason I like this one is I just think this adapter is slick. You just pull that up, then you've got the USB-C. The cord on this is nice and short, keeps everything tidy.